At 67, Ava Gardner finally talks about Humphrey Bogart. Ava Gardner was born Ava Levenia Gardner on December 24, 1922 in Grabtown, a tiny country place in North Carolina. She grew up in a simple working family, and Ava's early life was shaped by hard times and strength that many people had during the Great Depression in the South. Her parents were poor tobacco farmers, and Ava was the youngest of 7 kids. Even though her family didn't have much money and faced tough times when she was growing up, she had natural beauty and a special way about her that would later make her famous on movie screens. Her Southern background stayed an important part of who she was, affecting both how she acted and how she lived her life and career as she carried herself with a clear mix of natural grace and down-to-earth realness. Ava's start in Hollywood happened because of good luck, perfect timing, and amazing talent. She was discovered in the early 1940s by MGM talent hunters who were amazed not only by her stunning good looks, her bright green eyes, honey blonde hair, and perfect features, but also by the strong personality and charm that shined from her. Gardner's early career had small parts that slowly showed off her acting skills, but it was her big breakthrough in movies like The Killers in 1946 that made everyone know she was a powerful force on screen. Her acting as complicated women who weren't always good or bad showed she had deep talent that was more than just being pretty, letting her easily switch between playing seductive, weak, and fiercely independent characters. Ava Gardner's career was filled with working alongside some of the best directors and actors of her time, including John Huston, Humphrey Bogart, and Burt Lancaster. She worked really hard to get better at acting, often bringing raw emotional strength to her characters that touched audiences and movie critics. Important films like Mogambo in 1953, which got her nominated for an Academy Award, Showboat in 1951, and On the Beach in 1959, showed how versatile and appealing she was. Her acting often explored ideas about love, loss, and being strong, showing not only her artistic talents, but also her deep understanding of human feelings. Soon after Ava Gardner came to Los Angeles and started her contract work with MGM, she quickly met one of the studio's brightest young stars, Mickey Rooney. At that time, Rooney was famous all over America, loved by everyone for his role as the wholesome Andy Hardy in the really popular movie series. The two fell in love really fast, and even though Gardner came from a small town and didn't know much about Hollywood's fast lifestyle, she found herself caught up in Rooney's charm, humor, and high energy. Their relationship moved quickly, ending in marriage on January 10, 1942, when Gardner was only 19 years old. The wedding was held in the faraway little town of Ballard, California, far from the spotlight of Los Angeles. This choice wasn't just about privacy, but a planned move set up by MGM studio boss Louis B. Mayer. Mayer was scared that news of Rooney's marriage might hurt the carefully built public image of Andy Hardy, the all-American boy next door. Mayer worried that if audiences knew Rooney was married, especially to a beautiful young woman like Gardner, fans, especially young girls who looked up to him, would lose interest in the wholesome single character that had made him such a big moneymaker at movies. Unfortunately, the marriage fell apart almost as fast as it started. Gardner found out that behind Rooney's boyish charm was a darker side marked by heavy gambling and cheating on her. Though Rooney's public image was all about innocence, in private he lived wildly, enjoying late-night parties, affairs, and careless spending. Gardner, still getting used to life in Hollywood, was heartbroken by his behavior. By 1943, barely a year into the marriage, she asked for a divorce, saying mental cruelty as the official reason. Privately, however, she said the marriage broke down because of Rooney's gambling problem and his constant cheating. Even though it hurt her personally, Gardner was careful not to ruin Rooney's image in the newspapers. She didn't tell the public about his bad behavior, keeping the beloved on-screen character of Andy Hardy safe for his adoring fans. The newspapers and the studio kept Rooney's wholesome image, and Gardner quietly left, her first Hollywood marriage having taught her a hard lesson about the truth behind the glamorous fake fronts of fame. Gardner's second marriage happened only a couple of years later, this time to jazz musician and bandleader Artie Shaw, one of the most important people in the swing music time. Shaw, who had been married before to movie star Lana Turner, was known for his amazing musical talent, but also for his difficult and bossy personality. Gardner, still in her early 20s, got swept up in the fancy world of Shaw's music and smart thinking. However, their marriage quickly turned out to be troubled. Shaw reportedly expected Gardner to change herself to meet his exact standards, often criticizing her education and background. He was a perfectionist, not just in his music, but in his relationships, and Gardner soon found his talking down to her unbearable. Their marriage, lasting from 1945 to 1946, was short and stormy, leaving Gardner disappointed once again about her chances for lasting love. It was her third marriage, however, that became the most important and long-lasting chapter of her love life. In 1951, Ava Gardner married singer and actor Frank Sinatra, a man whose fame was as big as her own. Sinatra had left his first wife, Nancy Barbato, to be with Gardner, and their marriage caused a media frenzy. Headlines screamed with the scandal of Sinatra leaving his family for the glamorous movie star, and the public's fascination with their romance only grew over time. Gardner herself would later write in her life story that Sinatra was the great love of her life. Their relationship was passionate, magnetic, and deeply complicated, marked by both intense love and destructive fights. The Gardner-Sinatra marriage was as fiery as it was famous. Both stars were stubborn, fiercely independent, and living under the constant watching eyes of the press. Their marriage was troubled by jealousy, explosive arguments, and making up that was as passionate as their fights. During their time together, Gardner became pregnant twice, but she chose to end both pregnancies. In her autobiography, published after her death 8 months later, she explained that MGM had strict contract rules that punished its female stars for having children. The studio was scared motherhood would get in the way of a star's availability and make her less marketable, and Gardner felt trapped by those pressures. Her decisions showed the difficult position women in Hollywood often faced, forced to put careers before personal lives because of the control the studios had over them. By 1954, the constant trouble proved too much and Gardner asked for a divorce. However, their legal separation took a long time and the divorce wasn't finished until 1957. Even though their marriage ended, the connection between Gardner and Sinatra never truly broke. In fact, after the divorce, they managed to change their stormy romance into a lasting friendship. Gardner always spoke of Sinatra with love, calling him the love of her life, and Sinatra continued to support and care for her. Their connection lasted long after the passion had cooled, and they stayed close until Gardner's death in 1990. Their relationship, both during and after marriage, became one of Hollywood's most legendary love stories, remembered for its intensity, drama, and lasting emotional depth. By the time Ava Gardner reached the age of 67, she had already lived several lifetimes' worth of experiences. She had been a dazzling MGM starlet, a global screen icon, a Hollywood scandal maker, a three-time wife, a jet-setting adventurer, and, in her later years, a woman thinking about her place in cinema's golden age. Throughout her career, Gardner had worked alongside many of Hollywood's most famous leading men, Clark Gable, Gregory Peck, Burt Lancaster, and Frank Sinatra, who became one of the great loves of her life. Yet for decades, one person from her past loomed large, often mentioned by others, but rarely spoken of in detail by Ava herself. Humphrey Bogart. Bogart, by the time Gardner entered the Hollywood spotlight, was already a fully established star. He had changed himself from a character actor in gangster roles to one of the most iconic leading men of the 1940s thanks to Casablanca in 1942 and The Maltese Falcon in 1941. He carried with him a reputation for being tough, cynical, and coolly detached. But those who knew him well also described a man of sharp wit, surprising sensitivity, and a deep loyalty to his friends. Gardner, however, was careful about commenting on him publicly, partly out of respect, partly because of the complicated politics of Hollywood, and partly because she disliked feeding the gossip mills that swirled around her. But in her late 60s, long after Bogart's death in 1957, Gardner finally let herself speak more openly. Sitting in her London apartment in a thoughtful mood, she said with a wistful half-smile, "Bogart was one of a kind. He wasn't just the tough guy the movies made him out to be. He was sharp, funny, and he had this way of making you feel like you were in on the joke with him. I always admired that about him." She paused before continuing, explaining the difference between Bogart's screen character and the man she had known off-camera. People forget that Bogey wasn't a big man physically. He wasn't tall or handsome in the way Cary Grant was. But the moment he walked into a room, the atmosphere changed. He had presence, pure magnetism. You couldn't take your eyes off him. That's something you can't fake. Not in real life. Not on screen. Gardner, who had often been unfairly dismissed in her early years as simply a beautiful face, felt a kind of connection with Bogart in the way Hollywood underestimated them both at first. She thought back, he had to fight to prove himself just as I did. People thought I was just another pretty girl MGM had picked up, and for a while they were right. I didn't know the first thing about acting, but Bogey understood that struggle, that need to show you were more than the labels they stuck on you. When asked about their personal interactions, Gardner was careful but still warm in her memories. She remembered nights out when Bogart and his wife Lauren Bacall entertained friends, and she, often part of the Hollywood circle that revolved around Sinatra, found herself in Bogart's company. Bogey was protective of the people he cared about. He and Frank were close, and through Frank, I got to know him better. He could drink anyone under the table, but even when he was really drunk, he still had that twinkle in his eye. He had a way of making you feel seen, even if the whole room was trying to get his attention. As she grew older, Gardner began to feel a kind of nostalgia for the time period Bogart represented, a time that was already fading by the 1950s. When I think about Bogey, I think about the end of a certain Hollywood. He was part of the last group that didn't care about being polished. He smoked, he drank, he said what he thought. The studios couldn't make another Bogart if they tried. Believe me, they tried with a dozen other men, but it never worked. He was the real thing. Her tone turned softer as she talked about his personal struggles. He wasn't perfect. He had his demons like all of us did. He could be moody, stubborn, sometimes difficult, but that's what made him human. That's what made him Bogart. And I suppose that's why even now, all these years later, people still can't let him go. He left something behind that's untouchable. By speaking openly about Bogart at 67, Ava Gardner was not only offering a rare look into the private world of one of Hollywood's greatest stars, but also in a way thinking about her own mortality and legacy. In describing Bogart's authenticity, his magnetism, and his humanity, she was also affirming the values she herself treasured most: the refusal to be reduced to an image, the struggle to be taken seriously, and the enduring power of personality. Over time. In closing her thoughts that afternoon, Gardner sighed gently, her voice filled with both admiration and sadness. I don't think there will ever be another Bogey. He belonged to his time, and yet, he somehow belongs to all time. If you ask me, that's the best any of us can hope for, to be remembered the way he is. And he deserves every bit of it. In 1986, Ava Gardner's glamorous yet troubled life was shaken when she had a devastating stroke. The once lively actress, known for her glowing beauty and powerful screen presence, suddenly found herself facing health problems. Though she had saved enough money to pay for her medical expenses, an extraordinary gesture of devotion came from none other than Frank Sinatra, the man who had once been the great love of her life. Sinatra, who had never stopped caring for Ava, despite their fiery and stormy past, insisted on taking care of her treatment. He arranged for her to travel in comfort and safety, hiring a medically staffed private plane to bring her to a specialist in the United States. For Ava, who was known for her fierce independence and pride, allowing Sinatra to step in was a remarkable acknowledgement of the enduring bond they shared, a bond that time and distance had never truly broken. Despite such efforts, her health continued to get worse in the years that followed. On January 25, 1990, the world lost one of its most dazzling stars when Ava Gardner passed away at the age of 67. The cause was pneumonia, and she died quietly in Westminster, London, far from her North Carolina roots, but surrounded by the timeless aura of Hollywood legend that had never faded. Her death sent ripples across the entertainment industry, with admirers remembering not only her unforgettable performances in classics like The Killers, Mogambo, and The Barefoot Contessa, but also the untamed spirit that had made her one of cinema's most iconic women. 4 days later, on January 29th, Ava Gardner was brought home to Smithfield, North Carolina, where she was laid to rest in Sunset Memorial Park. There, beside her beloved siblings and her parents, Jonas and Molly Gardner, the small-town girl who had risen to become one of the most glamorous stars in the world, found eternal peace. Her grave remains a site of quiet pilgrimage for fans who continue to honor her memory, leaving flowers, notes, and tokens of admiration.